Most people today skim past biblical genealogies the way you skim the credits at the end of a movie. Names sliding by, hard to pronounce, easy to ignore. But in ancient Israel, those names weren't filler. They were a family's memory, a nation's legal record, a living map of belonging. A genealogy could tell you where you came from, what promises shaped your people, and whether God's covenant had truly held steady through the centuries. So when Matthew opens his gospel and begins, not with thunder or miracles, but with a lineage, he's not stalling. He's making a claim. This is where the rescue has been traveling all along, generation by generation, through real lives, real choices, real mess. And then Matthew does something that would have made careful readers sit up straighter. In a world built on fathers and sons, where ancestry typically marched forward through men's names, he pauses, again and again, to let women step into the line. Not as an afterthought, not as decoration, as signposts. 5 times, a woman's story breaks the expected rhythm, and every interruption feels intentional, like the narrator leaning in to say, "Don't miss what God is like. Don't miss who God uses." Because these aren't the safe stories you'd pick if you were trying to impress people. These women don't arrive with polished reputations and easy summaries. They arrive carrying tension. Some carry scandal. Some carry grief. Some carry foreignness like a mark that society refuses to forget. And yet there they are, woven into the ancestry of the Messiah, as if God is deliberately refusing to airbrush the family portrait, as if redemption, by definition, insists on entering the human story where it's tangled, not where it's tidy. If you listen closely, the genealogy stops sounding like a list and starts sounding like a tapestry, threads of mercy pulled through places you'd never expect mercy to go, dignity offered where dignity was denied, purpose planted where people assumed nothing good could grow. And the more you look at the women Matthew names, the clearer the pattern becomes. God's kingdom is not built on human merit, and God's plan is not limited by human categories. He doesn't choose only the obvious, the admired, the socially secure. He chooses the overlooked, the unlikely, sometimes the broken, so that grace, not pedigree, gets the last word. And the first name that startles you is Tamar. Her story doesn't feel like a children's lesson. It feels like a courtroom drama, a family tragedy, and a desperate fight for justice all at once. Tamar enters Judah's household as a bride, promised stability through marriage, promised a future through children, because in that world, a woman without a husband and without offspring wasn't simply lonely. She was exposed, vulnerable, easy to dismiss. Judah's firstborn, her husband, dies. The text says he was wicked. Don't linger on details. What it does linger on is what happens next. The responsibility to protect Tamar and preserve the family line falls to the next brother, as custom required. But the second husband refuses to give Tamar what the law and decency demanded. He uses her, yet denies her the child that would secure her place. He dies too. By now, Tamar has buried 2 men, and you can almost feel the suspicion gathering around her like a shadow. Judah, instead of acknowledging his son's failures, starts treating Tamar as the problem. Fear makes him cruel. He sends her away with a promise that sounds hopeful on the surface. When my youngest is older, but Tamar can hear the hollowness in it. Years pass. The youngest son grows up. The promise never moves. So Tamar waits until it becomes undeniable. Judah is not going to do right by her, not unless something forces the truth into the open. And then she does the unthinkable. Not because she's careless, but because she is cornered. She disguises herself and positions herself on the road Judah will travel. Judah, blind to who she is and careless with what he's doing, comes to her. Tamar asks for a pledge, his seal, his cord, his staff, items that are not trinkets but identity, equivalent of signature and authority. Dens later, when Tamar's pregnancy becomes known, the hypocritical outrage ignites instantly. Judgment is quick when power feels threatened. Judah demands punishment, severe and public, as though he is defending righteousness instead of hiding his own failure. Tamar doesn't argue in the street. She doesn't beg. She simply sends the pledge back like evidence placed on the table, the seal, the cord, the staff, proof that the one condemning her is the one responsible. And something rare happens. Judah, caught, doesn't double down. He looks at the evidence and speaks a sentence that ripples forward through the generations. Stat 3:10. She is more righteous than I am. It's not that the story calls deception good. It's that the story exposes a deeper truth. Tamar was denied justice until she risked everything to confront injustice. And God, rather than discarding her story as too messy to mention, threads her into the lineage anyway, because the Messiah's family line is not a museum of perfect behavior. It's a record of God's faithfulness moving through human failure. Not long after Tamar, another woman's name appears, Rahab, and with her, the boundaries stretch even wider. Rahab doesn't come from Israel at all. She lives in Jericho, a fortified city with a locked gate mentality, the kind of place that believes its walls can keep out destiny. And Rahab herself is labeled in a way that would have placed her at the bottom rung of respectability, someone people thought they could use and then forget. But while the city trembles at rumors of Israel's God, Red Sea stories, defeated kings, the sense of an unstoppable people coming closer, Rahab listens differently. Fear spreads through Jericho like smoke, but in Rahab something else ignites recognition. Two Israelite spies slip into the city, and somehow they end up at her house. Built along the wall, strategic, vulnerable, a place where escape is possible. The king's men arrive fast. Bring them out, they demand. Rahab is standing at a fork in the road. Turn them in and buy safety for herself, or hide them and gamble everything. She hides them. Then she sends the king's men running the wrong direction, buying the spies time. And when the danger passes, she speaks words no one expects from her lips. She doesn't just say she's scared. She says she knows. She confesses that the God of Israel is God in heaven above and on earth below, not a tribal deity, not a rumor, the true God. And she asks for more than her own survival. She asks for her family. Amongst the spies give her a sign, a crimson cord to hang in the window, so that when the city falls, that marked household will be spared. The image lingers, reared against stone, mercy against judgment, refuge in the middle of collapse. When Jericho's walls finally come down, everything changes in a moment. A city ends, but a new life begins. Rahab walks out of Jericho and into Israel's story, not as a trophy, not as a footnote, but as family. And time does. What time always does when God is involved, it transforms. Labels. Rahab becomes the mother of a line that leads to Boaz, to David, to Jesus. The outsider is brought inside. The condemned is welcomed. The past is not allowed to have final authority over the future. Then comes Ruth, and with her, the story slows down, less like a spy thriller, more like a quiet sunrise after a long night. Ruth is not an Israelite either. She is a Moabite, from a people Israel didn't easily trust. Her story begins not with romance, but with funerals. Naomi, an Israelite woman living in Moab, loses her husband. Then she loses her sons. The grief piles up until it feels like there's nothing left but survival. Naomi decides to go home to Bethlehem, and she urges her daughters-in-law to stay behind, where they might find security again. One of them does. Ruth doesn't. Ruth's words land like a vow spoken in the presence of God himself. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. It's loyalty, yes, but it's also conversion, a turning of the heart. Ruth is not merely choosing Naomi. She is choosing Naomi's God, even if it costs her everything familiar. In Bethlehem, Ruth does the only work available to someone in her position. She gleans, stooping behind harvesters to collect what they leave behind, gathering survival. One handful at a time. It's humble work that leaves your back aching and your dignity at the mercy of other people's kindness. But God is already arranging providence in the ordinary. Ruth happens to glean in the field of Boaz, a man with status and integrity, and a family connection, Naomi. Boaz has heard of Ruth, how she refused to abandon Naomi, how she traded her own prospects for faithful love. Instead of exploiting Ruth's vulnerability, Boaz protects her, honors her, provides for her. Naomi sees hope flicker again, and she speaks of redemption in the language of their people. A kinsman redeemer, someone who can restore what has been lost. Ruth approaches Boaz with courage that is quiet but real, asking him, symbolically, to cover her with protection. Boaz doesn't treat her as an object or a scandal. He treats her as worthy. He handles the process openly, honorably, even when it's complicated by another relative's claim. And when Ruth becomes his wife, the story that began with famine and graves ends with a child in Naomi's arms. Obed, grandfather of David, Ruth's legacy isn't built on spectacle. It's built on faithful steps. And somehow God takes that steady, hidden devotion and makes it a bridge into the Messiah's future. Then the genealogy turns darker again, and Matthew doesn't even speak Bathsheba's name the way you expect. He calls her the wife of Uriah, as if refusing to let David's sin rewrite her identity. Bathsheba's story begins with power imbalance and loss. David sees her and sends for her, and the text makes plain where the power sits. He sends, she is brought. Soon she is pregnant, and David tries to bury the truth under strategy. He calls Uriah home, hoping to make the timing look normal. Uriah refuses comfort while his fellow soldiers are in danger. His loyalty shines like a rebuke. Dear. So David turns from cover-up to bloodshed. A letter is written, and Uriah unknowingly carries his own death sentence to the battlefield. He is killed. Bathsheba mourns, and then she is taken into the palace, pulled into the aftermath of someone else's choices as much as her own. God confronts David through the prophet Nathan, and the consequences are severe. The child dies. It's grief stacked on grief, and you can feel how sin spills outward, harming people who were never holding the pen when the plans were made. Yet Bathsheba does not disappear into the shadows of tragedy. Later she becomes a figure of wisdom and resolve, navigating palace danger to secure Solomon's rightful place when power struggles erupt. And from the ashes of a story that started in exploitation and death, God brings a son who will build the temple, Solomon, another link in the chain leading to Jesus. Bathsheba's presence in the genealogy doesn't excuse what was done to her. It announces something else. God can redeem what human power tried to ruin. He can bring life where someone else sowed destruction. He can honor the wounded without pretending the wound never happened. And then finally, the line arrives at Mary, so ordinary by the world's standards that you can almost miss how revolutionary her part is. Mary is a young woman from Nazareth, a town with no prestige. Her life is small in the way most lives are small, betrothed, planning, expecting an everyday future. And then an angel speaks into her ordinary world, and suddenly the air itself feels different. She is told she will conceive, not through human means, but through the Spirit of God. She will bear a son who will be called the Son of the Most High. The weight of it is unimaginable, and Mary's first response is not theatrical. It is honest. How will this be? When the answer comes, it doesn't make the road easier. It makes it riskier. Pregnancy before marriage could mean shame, rejection, even death. Yet Mary's words fall like a key turning in a lock. I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. That sentence is not soft. It is fierce surrender. Mary steps into a future where she must trust God against public suspicion. Trust God when Joseph is confused and wounded. Trust God as they travel and give birth in poverty. Trust God as they flee as refugees to protect the child. Trust God as her son grows into a mission she cannot control. And when he is rejected, condemned, and nailed to a cross, Mary's faith is not theoretical. It stands at the foot of suffering and does not run. You can almost see them arriving, tired, late, the air sharp with night, doors crowded, rooms full. No place that feels safe or dignified. No soft landing for the woman carrying the hope of the world. And that right there is already telling you what kind of king this is going to be. Not the kind who begins by taking space, but the kind who begins by making himself small. Reigns. So the child comes in the most unguarded place imaginable. Not under palace torches, but in the hush of animals and straw. The first sounds are not trumpets, but a newborn's cry. Thin, urgent, human. The one who held galaxies together now needs to be held. And then God does what God always does. He invites the unlikely to witness it first. Ben shepherds out in the fields. Men with rough hands and ordinary lives are interrupted by glory. A sudden brightness splits the dark, and they tremble the way people tremble when heaven feels too close. They're told not to fear, and given a sign that feels almost absurd. You'll find him wrapped in cloths, lying in a manger. Not you'll find him in the governor's house. Not you'll find him surrounded by priests, a feeding trough. A baby, they find him exactly as promised. And when they speak, when they tell Mary and Joseph what they saw and heard, it's as if God is saying, my salvation is not a private achievement of the powerful. It will be announced to the small, entrusted to the humble, and carried into the world by ordinary mouths. Mary listens and stores it all inside her like treasure. Not because she understands every detail. Who could? But because faith often looks like keeping what God has done close to your chest while the world continues to be confusing. Downtime moves and the child grows, and the pattern repeats. Outsiders keep arriving at the edges of the story and somehow end up near the center. Wise men from the east, foreigners with expensive gifts and a hunger for truth, follow a sign in the sky. Even they are drawn toward this king. Gold, frankincense, myrrh, gifts that feel like prophecy in physical form, royalty, worship, death. And just when you can breathe, just when it seems like maybe the danger has passed, the old kind of power rears its head. Herod hears the word king and panics, not because he loves his people, but because he loves his throne. He smiles with his mouth and plots with his hands, and the story turns sharp. A ruler who cannot bear the idea of losing power decides that innocence is expendable. And again, God speaks in dreams. Again, the vulnerable are warned. Joseph is told to flee, and the family becomes refugees, slipping out into the night, carrying the child into Egypt, living as strangers in a foreign land. You can feel the irony. The one who will one day welcome the weary is, at the beginning, the weary one running for his life. And eventually they return not to the spotlight but to Nazareth, back to the quiet, back to the unremarkable town where people will later sneer, "Can anything good come from there?" And Jesus grows up in obscurity, the kind of obscurity the world mistakes for insignificance. He learns woodwork, he eats meals, he walks roads, he laughs, gets tired, bleeds when he scrapes his skin, and all the while the promises are ripening, hidden like seeds under soil. And if the other women show us that God's grace reaches into scandal, into foreignness, into grief, into injustice, then Mary shows us that grace also asks something: the courage to carry God's promise even when it costs you your reputation, your comfort, your sense of a normal life. Benia. So when Matthew writes the genealogy, he isn't just proving Jesus is connected to David or Abraham. He's revealing the kind of story God tells, a story that refuses to be sanitized, a story that keeps making room for the unexpected, a story where women the world might overlook become hinges on which history turns. And that's why, when you reach the end of the list, you're meant to feel less like you've read a record, and more like you've been invited into a pattern, a way God works that still hasn't changed. Bands, because maybe you know what it is to be judged too quickly, like Tamar, or to be labeled by your past, like Rahab, or to feel like your faithfulness is small and unseen, like Ruth gleaning in the fields, or to carry wounds that came from someone else's power, like Bathsheba, or to be asked to trust God into a future you cannot explain, like Mary. No, and if that's true, then the genealogy isn't distant at all. It's close. It's almost uncomfortably personal, like it's leaning toward you, making space for your name in the same kind of story. And as we move from Mary toward what her son will do next, it's worth slowing down one more time, because the next scene doesn't begin with a throne or an army. It begins with a child, a whispered promise, and a world that doesn't yet realize what's about to break open, because the world Matthew is describing doesn't pivot on the kind of power people recognize at first glance. It pivots on whispered obedience in the dark, on decisions made when no one is applauding, that looks like quiet endurance. Unpicture Joseph for a moment, not a symbol in a nativity scene, but a real man with a real pulse. He hears the news of Mary's pregnancy and feels the floor drop out from under him. In his world, a betrothal is binding, shame is public, betrayal stains everything. And Joseph, being the kind of man who still fears God, doesn't want to make her a spectacle. He plans to step back quietly, to absorb the heartbreak without turning it into violence. That's what restraint looks like when a person is trying to be righteous, but doesn't yet understand the miracle he's standing next to. Then God speaks into Joseph's night the way God so often does. When a person has run out of good options and is about to choose the least painful one, an angel meets him in a dream and tells him the thing that sounds impossible until it becomes the only thing that makes sense. Don't be afraid to take her as your wife. This child is not a scandal. This child is a promise. This is not the collapse of Joseph's future. This is the beginning of the world being repaired. And just like that, the genealogy becomes flesh. The ink on Matthew's page becomes footsteps on dusty roads. A Munja decree comes from far away, from Caesar, from an empire that doesn't know it's being used like a tool. A census, a command, people must travel to be counted. And Joseph, tied to David's line, must go to David's town. So Mary and Joseph set out for Bethlehem, not because they're chasing prophecy, but because Rome tells them to move. Yet behind Rome's paper and power, God is quietly guiding the thread into the exact place the prophets spoke of long ago. Then, when the time is right, the story steps out from the shadows into the open. A voice cries out in the wilderness, John the Baptist, calling people to turn around, to repent, to prepare. And one day Jesus walks into the river with everyone else. No special treatment, no separation. He stands among sinners as if he belongs with them. And in a way, he does, because he didn't come to observe humanity from a distance. He came to step into it. He is baptized, and heaven answers. The Spirit descends. A voice speaks love over him. It's one of those moments where the veil feels thin, where earth and heaven touch so clearly you can almost hear the air ring. And then, almost immediately, Jesus is driven into the wilderness, into hunger, into confrontation with temptation. It's as if the story is saying, the Messiah will not save by avoiding human weakness. He will save by entering it and overcoming it without surrendering to it. The battle begins, not with swords, but with truth. Clinchant. When he comes out of that wilderness, he begins to call people, and the way he calls them echoes the genealogy like a refrain. Brenius, he doesn't start by building alliances with the most impressive names. He starts by walking along water and calling fishermen. He goes to tax collectors, men considered traitors, and sits at their tables. He touches lepers. He speaks to women others ignore. He praises the faith of foreigners. He welcomes children. He lets the unclean come near. He does not guard his holiness the way religious people often do, by keeping distance. He spreads holiness the way fire spreads warmth, by getting close. And the religious leaders, the ones who think God's family should look tidy and controlled, start to bristle. They watch him forgive sins and eat with the wrong people, and treat women as if they have voices worth hearing. They watch him heal on days they've declared untouchable. They watch crowds gather, and they feel their control slipping. But the people who have lived at the edges, the ones who know what it is to be stared at, to be labeled, to be disqualified, those people begin to recognize something in him that feels like home. Not because he flatters them, because he tells the truth and offers mercy in the same breath. Because he sees them, and that's when you realize why Matthew began the way he did. The genealogy wasn't merely introduction, it was forecast. Men's Tamar's ache for justice finds its answer in the one who will one day speak about weightier matters. Justice, mercy, faithfulness, and actually embody them. Under Rahab's rescue behind a crimson sign finds its echo in a greater rescue, where blood will mark a doorway wide enough for the world. Ruth's loyalty, her willingness to leave one identity and cling to another, foreshadows the kind of belonging Jesus will offer, family not based on bloodlines alone, but on faith and surrender. Bathsheba's story, scarred by misuse of power, stands in the shadow of a king who will not exploit, who will not grasp, who will not crush the vulnerable to protect himself, but will instead lay down his life. And Mary, the young woman who said yes without knowing the cost, becomes the first witness to a kingdom that begins like a seed and grows like a tree. By the time Jesus begins speaking about the kingdom of God, you can hear the genealogy whispering underneath every parable. This kingdom is for the poor in spirit, for the mourning, for the meek, for the hungry, for the merciful. It is for the people the world calls last. It is a kingdom that moves toward broken places the way light moves into cracks. And if you stay with the story long enough, you'll notice something else. Jesus doesn't just include the unlikely. He centers them. He lets a sinful woman weep at his feet and sends her away forgiven. He lets a foreign woman's bold faith draw miracles out of him. He speaks to a Samaritan woman at a well and turns her into a messenger. He allows women to follow him openly, learn from him, support his ministry, things that would have unsettled the social order of his day. It's as if the genealogy keeps walking around in human form, proving its point in every encounter. But the closer Jesus gets to the heart of his mission, the heavier the air becomes. Opposition thickens, misunderstanding multiplies. The road narrows toward Jerusalem. And somewhere ahead, not far from the cheers of the crowds and not far from the shadow of a cross, there's a final question forming, one that ties every name in that genealogy together. What kind of Messiah saves a world like this? Modest, because the answer is not going to be comfortable, and it's not going to be clean. And the next step in the story is going to feel like everything is falling apart, even as God is doing the thing he planned from the beginning. And when Jesus finally turns his face toward Jerusalem, when he begins walking like a man who knows exactly where the road ends, the whole gospel starts to lean forward as if holding its breath, and you can almost hear the city in the distance, crowded, tense, waiting, while the king who began in a manger keeps walking closer and closer into the place where redemption is going to cost more than anyone expects. And just before he arrives, there's one more moment, one more table, one more choice that will reveal what kind of love is driving him, because the story is about to shift from teaching and healing into something darker, deeper, and final enough to change everything. And the question is no longer whether God can use messy people, but whether God is willing to enter the mess himself all the way to the bottom. The next scene opens with